So let's start this lesson by opening up an After Effects project. You can find this After Effects project under Project Files AE7 Masters, Lessons, Lesson 1, Storm Tracker, AEP. And you're going to click on the first one, Storm Background, Foreground, Start. So let's just double click on that. And let's take a look at what's in here. Basically, we've imported some examples of what we're going to be working on in the first lesson. Our goal is to create this storm background. We'll just play that so we can see it. So we have clouds, we have rain, and we have lightning. So this will be our background plate for our animation. Most important thing about any animation that you're working on is the background. If you spend enough time on the background, everything else becomes easier. So we're going to try and make sure we have a really dynamic background here and then start building up after that. The other part of our project for this lesson is the foreground. And in our foreground layer, we're going to have rain and some more lightning. But we're going to change this just a little bit from the background layer lightning and rain. The other file that has been imported is our Storm Tracker style page, and that's what we're looking at here. This is basically our blueprint to keep us on track with what we need to build. So the first thing we're going to build, and we can even look at it here, is our background. So let's start with that. I'm going to toggle collapse the examples folder, and I'm going to start a new composition. And let's name this composition Storm Background. We'll use the preset NTSC DV, and our duration will be 5 seconds. Let's click OK. Now, what we're going to need is a new solid layer, 720 by 480. We can also, just to make sure, put it to make comp size, click OK. And we're going to have to add a fractal noise effect to that. So under Effects and Presets, let's start typing in fractal noise. And we don't even have to type in the whole thing. And as you can see, fractal noise comes up, and we'll just drag that to the dark gray solid layer, and we have our default fractal noise. Now, fractal noise is really neat. You can do a lot of things with this. One of the things I'm just going to go through really quickly just to show you how I go about choosing my fractal types and my noise types. I'm more of a hunt and peck to find what I like. So the first thing I'll do is go under Basic and just basically scroll through these to find something that works for what I'm doing. In this instance, I'm going to use Dynamic. The next thing I usually do is go under the noise type, and I can adjust how I want the noise type to be affecting the fractal. You can see we get all sorts of different variations. For this one, I want to just go with soft linear. The next setting that I'm going to adjust is my contrast, and this is just making it how bright or high contrast the image is. So I'm going to bring this contrast up to around 200. In fact, it'd be easier for me to just type that. 200 on my contrast. The next setting I can adjust is my brightness. If I slide it towards the right, gets brighter. Slide it towards the left, gets darker. So let's slide that to about -25. So I'm getting some nice contrast. It's starting to look very ominous, very spooky. So let's go now to my transform settings. In my transform settings, I'm going to go down pretty much to the bottom of this to the perspective offset. And what this is going to allow me to do is give my clouds a little 3D type of movement so I can get some volume in them. So the first thing I want to do is set a keyframe for the offset turbulent property. Let's stretch this out just a little bit here so you can see the words offset turbulence. And we'll set it into place in the beginning, and we're going to go to the end of the timeline. Just going to hit the end key actually just to get to the end of this. And if I scroll on this, you can see now I'm starting to get this rolling cloud feeling. Let's set that to 1000. And let's preview that so we can see what it looks like. So let's select the timeline, select the home key, and hit 0 on our numeric keypad. So now we get a nice realistic rolling cloud effect by changing our offset turbulence. And let's stop that and continue to change some more settings. So let's toggle collapse the transform, and I'm actually going to toggle collapse evolution and open up the sub settings, because what I want to do now is do some adjustments on my sub rotation. So I'm going to set a keyframe here for my sub rotation, and I'm going to go to the end of my timeline and just scrub on my sub rotation. You can see I'm starting to get this nice rotation in my fractal. I only want to do this slightly. So let's set this to about 10. And if we scrub on this, you can see we're just getting a slight rotation in our fractal noise. From here, I'm done with my fractal noise. I don't need to do anything else with that. What I'm going to do now is just toggle collapse that so I don't have to see fractal noise anymore. And what we're going to do is now mask off this area. So I'm going to stretch this out just a little bit so I can see a little bit more of my window here. I'm just scrolling on my mouse to make that a little bit smaller. I'm going to get my mask tool and just mask off the top portion of my clouds. I'm also going to turn off the checkerboard view so that I just see black. And now I want to soften the bottom of my clouds. So under the dark gray solid 1, I'll type F for feather. That's the shortcut. Drag this up a little bit so you can see it. If I drag on the mask feather, you can see it softens the clouds. So let's set that to about 200. I'm going to turn off my mask view. Just scrub on this so you can see what's going on. The next thing I want to do with my cloud layer is give it a little distortion, give it a little bit of a perspective feel to it. So what I'm going to use is the distort effect corner pin. So I can just type in corner. I don't have to type in the whole word. And I'm just going to drag corner pin onto this layer and start adjusting the corner pin. So we're going to bring the bottom targets on the corner pin up, and we're going to pull out the top targets, give a nice perspective feel to this, stretch it out, maybe move these a little bit further down, stretch these out a little bit more. I'll just scrub on this to make sure that it's doing what I want it to do. Yeah, that looks nice and ominous. And I can toggle collapse that. Now, what I want to do next, let's put this fit up to 100% so I can fill my entire screen. I'm going to hold down the tilde key so I can see a full screen preview. And we're going to preview it one more time before I start adding any color to this, just to make sure it's doing what I want it to do. So let's go home first, and then let's hit 0 on the numeric keypad. Okay. So now we have our nice RAM preview, and you can see we have our rolling clouds going through. They're going off into the distance because of the corner pin, and that's giving us a nice three-dimensional feel for these clouds. Let's get out of this by clicking on the tilde key again. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit so I can see my effects again. And now we're going to colorize this layer. So I'm going to toggle collapse fractal noise and corner pin, and I'm going to go to my effects and presets palette, and I'm going to type in CC toner. There we go. I can just drag this onto the clouds. And the toner is basically a tritone effect. So what's changing is I can change my highlights, I can change my midtones, and I can change my shadows. So by default, I'm getting this sepia look, but I want blue. So I'm just going to click in the color picker. And let's just drag up to a nice blue. And I'll grab a kind of a dark blue to give it a scarier feel to it. Click OK. And we have nice blue rolling clouds. You can drag on that to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. The next thing we're going to do is add some lightning strikes to our clouds. So let's go back up to the effects and presets. Let's just start typing in levels. And let's just drag levels onto our layer. And we'll stretch this out a little bit so we can see the entire histogram. And what we're going to do is make sure we're at the beginning of the timeline first, is set a keyframe for our histogram, exactly where it is, and let's move to 10 frames on the timeline. So I'm just going to click in the time code, type in 10, and hit enter. And I'm going to drag on the white input for my level so I can just bring this up. So this clear arrow is my white input. If I wanted to make this darker, I'd drag on the black arrow. If I wanted to adjust the contrast, I would grab the center arrow to adjust that. I'm just going to reset that for a second. And let's just drag this in to right about here. And you're basically eyeballing this. But if you want to set in a number, you can set in 100. So let's move down the timeline a little bit. Let's move down to 20 frames. And let's reset that so it goes back to its default. Now let's move down the timeline one more time to 25. And we're going to bring our white levels up again. And again, we can just eyeball this right about here. So around 145 would be fine. And we'll move down a little bit more to about 1 second. I can just drag to get to 1 second and reset that. So if I scrub on this, I can see I'm getting this flash of lightning. Now I'm going to want to use this lightning flash again, but I don't want to set these levels another time. So let's go to the beginning of the timeline and just type the letter U. Drag this up a little bit. And I'm going to marquee select all of those keyframes and just copy them. Command-C. If you are on a PC, Control-C. And let's move down the timeline a little bit. So going down to 2 seconds on our timeline, we'll paste these keyframes, Command-V. If you're on a PC, Control-V. And we'll also move down to 4 seconds and paste them one more time. So let's move back to the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to select my composition window, press the tilde key, and do a RAM preview by hitting the 0 on the numeric keypad. Now that we have our RAM preview, you can see the nice lightning strikes that are going throughout the animation. We have our rolling clouds, and at this point we're done with our clouds, and now we just have to move on to our next layer. If this helps you out, I'm going to give you some sound effects. Okay, moving right along. Let's hit the tilde key, reduce that. I'm going to collapse this layer. Make sure I'm at the beginning of the layer and create a new solid. So layer, new solid. And this layer we're going to call rain. So R-A-I-N. We also need to change the color of this solid. So let's go down here to the gray solid and just drag that to black and click OK. We're also going to fix a mistake that we made earlier. Let's make sure we rename this layer. So select dark gray solid 1, hit return, and just type in cloud. With that fixed, we can move on to the rain layer. So for the rain layer, pretty obvious, we're going to use the rain effect. So under the effects and presets, let's just type in rain. With our rain effect, let's just drag that to the rain layer. We have our rain, and we're just going to adjust this a little bit. So let's start by adjusting the amount. So we don't want this much rain, so we can drag this down. You can see if we drag to the right, we get more rain. If we drag to the left, we get less rain. Let's type in 150. The rain speed, I don't want it moving as fast as it does on the default, so let's just reduce that by half, so 0.5. The angle of the rain, we're going to increase the angle, so let's slide that to about 40. In fact, if you just want to type 40, it's a little bit easier. We also want to change the angle variation, so our raindrops are a little bit different from each other. So let's set that to about 30. Now, right now, the raindrops are a little bit hard to see. I'm going to stretch this out so you can see this a little bit better. But I'm also going to change the drop size. So let's just drag on the drop size so you can see what's going to happen here. If we drag to the right, you can see the drops become a lot larger in thickness. If we drag to the left, they get a lot smaller. In fact, I'm going to hold down Shift so this moves a lot faster as I scroll across. So you can see the difference here. But what we're going to want is it's somewhere around 3 or 4. I'm just going to hit in 3. So that should be fine. We're also going to want to change the opacity. So the opacity is basically how opaque or how transparent the raindrops are. We're going to set that to 25. I'm going to reposition this a little bit. Scroll on this just to see how my drops are falling. And that looks okay. The next thing I need to do is I want those drops to show up on the cloud layer. So we're going to have to use the transfer modes. Just in case your transfer mode isn't open, right down here is a transfer mode button. If you click on that, you can see it disappears and it reappears. Well, make sure that your transfer mode is up. And what we're going to do is change our normal mode to a screen mode. And what the screen mode is going to do for us, it's going to knock out all of the dark areas and keep the light areas. So now we have the rain showing up on the clouds. And we can preview from here. So I'm going to select the composition window, press the tilde key, and the 0 on the numeric keypad to preview. And you can see we have our rain falling, our clouds moving, and it looks pretty good. So let's stop that. Let's just click, hit the tilde key again. So the next layer that we're going to want to work with is a lightning layer. And this is a fun layer to work with. So let's go Layer, New, solid, and let's name this lightning. Width and height 720 by 480, and let's just click OK. Now the effect that we're going to want to use on this is advanced lightning. So let's just drag advanced lightning onto the lightning layer. So there's not much that we need to change in our lightning settings, but I am going to stretch this out a little bit so we can read this a little bit better. And the two things that we're really concerned with are our origin and our direction. So you see these two little targets here. This is your origin target. So this is where the lightning starts from. And this is your direction target. So this is basically where the lightning ends up. Now I'm going to reduce the size of this window slightly so that I can move the origin outside the window, and I can move the direction also outside the window. And we'll set keyframe for origin and a keyframe for direction. Let's move down the timeline about 5 frames. So let's just type in 5, and let's bring the direction back in. So grab in direction, make sure you grab the right one. Let's move it to about here. Let's also change the lightning type from direction to braking. This will give us more forks inside of our lightning. Okay, let's move down the timeline a little bit more. Let's click on the time code, just type in 10, and we're going to change the position of our direction. So let's just drag that down to about here, somewhere where it looks really cool. So we have these 2 forks coming out of it. And we'll move down the timeline one more time. Let's just type in 15 and move that somewhere here. And again, eyeball it to where you think the lightning looks really good. I like it right about there. Now, of course, our lightning doesn't all have to be the same. In fact, it's cooler if we don't have them all the same. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to end the lightning. So we're actually going to snap the back of the layer to this point on the time marker, and we're going to use a key command. So holding down the Option key and selecting back bracket will snap that back end of the layer so that we've shortened this. Okay, and we'll just scrub on that. The next thing we want to do is we want this lightning to interact or glow a little bit with our background. So right now our transfer mode is set to normal. I want you to just select Add. So what Add is going to do, it's kind of like Screen. It's going to knock out the dark areas and bring in the light areas, but Add also adds a slight glow. So you can see a slight glow around the lightning. So now that we have this lightning, let's move it further down the timeline with a duplicate layer. Now, this is really important. If you have advanced lightning selected and you try to duplicate this layer, let me just show you this so you can see this, Command D, you're actually duplicating the effect. We don't want to do that. So make sure you click in this negative area below the timeline and then select lightning. So let's go Command D, so we have a duplicate layer. We'll go to about 4 seconds, and I'm going to use the shortcut key of front bracket to just snap that layer to 4 seconds. Okay, just scroll on this to test to make sure everything is going where it's supposed to go. I'll go to the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to select the composition window. I'm going to type in the tilde key, and also let's put this to fit up to 100% so we can see the entire screen. And let's hit 0 on our numeric keypad to preview. Okay, great. We're done with our background layer, and now we can start creating our foreground layer. So let's click on the composition window. I'm going to select the tilde key. I'm going to go to my project window, and I'm going to select the storm background. Now what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the storm background. So Command D to duplicate it, and let's rename it. Hit Return on the keyboard and name this Storm Foreground. And hit Return. Let's double click on Storm Foreground to open that composition. And the first thing that I want you to do is select the cloud layer and actually delete it. We won't need that layer. So we're just going to adjust some of the effects that we already have. So I want you to select the rain layer and hit E for effect. So you'll see CC Rain. And let's just double click on that to call up the effects control panel. And we're just going to change some of these settings. So let's go in and change the amount. We're going to increase the amount by 200. So we have more rain. We're going to slow the rain down. So instead of half speed, put in 0.3. Slow the rain down a little bit more. We're going to adjust the angle. So instead of 40, let's go down to 20. We will also adjust the angle variation from 30 to 40, because we want this rain to be just a little bit different than the rain we've created before. Our drop size can stay the same. Our opacity, we're going to increase that to 100%. So we have really opaque rain, but we're going to change our source depth, and we're going to cut that down to half. So this way we have less rain. So if we just scroll on this, you can see we have more opaque rain, but it's a lot less rain than we had before. We're also going to adjust our lightning. So I want you to go to the lightning layer, the first lightning layer, and let's go in and change some of these settings for our core settings and our glow settings. So I want you to open up core settings, and we're going to change the core radius. So let's increase the size of that. In fact, scroll a little bit, let's say about 7 frames, so you can actually see the changes. So let's change the core radius from 2. You can drag this so you can see what's happening. And if I hold down Shift, this will change a lot more. So our core radius is basically the size of the lightning or the internal lightning. So we're going to set that to 10. We're also going to change our glow radius. So collapse core settings and go to glow settings, and let's open that up. So our glow radius right now is set to 50, and if we drag on this, you can see what it does. Just basically glows around our lightning. Okay, we're going to set this to something smaller, so let's set this to 25. And we're also going to change the glow opacity. So right now the glow opacity is set to 50. If we drag on this, you can see we can go up to 100, or we can take the opacity down to being totally transparent. We're going to leave this at 100%. Let's collapse our glow settings, and let's go to forking. And we can adjust the amount of forking on our animation, so it's a couple of more forks. So you can see in here, we can really go nuts with this, or take them out altogether. We want to have this at 50%. Okay? Instead of going in and doing all of those changes for the second layer, I'm actually just going to delete it, duplicate this lightning layer one more time, Command D. I'm going to go to 4 seconds on my timeline, and just front bracket on the keyboard to snap it to that position. So we have our 2 new lightning layers and our new rain layer. Let's go in and add an adjustment layer to this. So layer new, adjustment layer. And what the adjustment layer is going to do is we can add effects to the adjustment layer, and they'll affect every layer under this. So we're going to add a vector blur to that. So let's just type in vector blur. There it is. We will drag this onto the adjustment layer, and we don't have to change much. So in here we have a couple of different things, and the first thing is let's just adjust the amount. I'm going to drag this over so that you can see the lightning and see what the adjustment layer is doing, or the vector blur is doing to our layer. By dragging this higher, we're actually blurring starting from the hot spots or the luminance spots of the layer and blurring out gradually. So we can get some pretty cool effects by doing this. Now we don't have to go to this extreme, so let's go in and dial in some numbers. I'm going to set this to about 50. The next setting that we're going to want to change is our ridge smoothness. So right now our ridge smoothness is set to 1. If we drag on this, you can see this really smooths the hot spots or the luminance areas of our layer. So we're going to set that to about 10. The last setting that we're going to do is our map softness, which is basically blurring the original document or the original layer that we had. So you can see if we move this back and forth, the changes in there. Let's just set that to 10. Let's do a full screen RAM preview of this so we can see what we have. So selecting the tilde key and hitting 0 on the numeric keypad, we'll start our RAM preview. Okay, so now we have our RAM preview, and you can see what the vector blur has added for us. We're getting a nice wet feel to the raindrops as well as to the lightning. So the reason that we had to bring the opacity up on the raindrops was so that it can actually be seen. If the opacity is very light, there would be no way for vector blur to interact with it. So that's why we brought that up. You can also see the nice wet feeling that the lightning gets. So vector blur is one of my favorite effects inside of After Effects and can be used in all sorts of ways to bring in some organic feel to your animations. So let's stop this. I'm going to hit the tilde key. And the last part of this lesson is to render our compositions. So let's hold down Shift and select Storm Foreground and Storm Background. Let's go Composition, Add to render queue. Let's hit the tilde key, and let's make sure that our settings are appropriate. So let's click on Best Settings, make sure your quality is at best, your resolution is at full, okay? Let's go under Lossless and make sure for what we're doing, we don't want any compression. So on our Format options, we're using QuickTime. So under Format, we're using QuickTime Movie, and under Format options, make sure you're at Animation and the quality is at best. From there, we could just click OK. And we also want to make sure that we know where we're outputting to. So let's click on stormforeground.movie. And from this point, let's put it in a place that we can retrieve it for later because we are going to do a final composite with all of our rendered animations. Now, you don't have to render this if you don't want to. I've already rendered all of these animations so that we could use them later on in our final composite. And let's just set it to render.